this class, we are talking about some pretty substantial ideas. What is art? Why is art? How do we make art that matters? These sorts of things. And I thought it would be helpful for us to hear from some different people other than just myself and our class. So I've arranged for a few conversations with different people that I thought would have a lot to say about this particular topic. The first of these conversations is with someone named John Dalton. If you are unfamiliar with John and the work that he is doing, I highly encourage you to look him up. You'll see in the video towards the end that he gives us some of the places where we can find him, but just here at the beginning, if you go to johndalton.me.com, you'll be able to find all the different things that he's doing. John is, I think, a deeply spiritual person. From what I've learned about him just in the little bit that I've watched him and then having a conversation with him, his life rings true in that he seems to be living out his ideals on a whole host of levels. And so it's no surprise that the art that he makes feels and sort of like vibrates with life. And it's not just a painting or a drawing, but you'll see that John describes his entire life as his work of art. Some of you might know John most specifically from his podcast, even though he is an author and has had several careers before we have probably come to know him as a host for a podcast. The podcast is named Gently Does It, and again, if you haven't checked it out, you really, really should. John has had the opportunity to speak with what I think are some of the best artists in the world. From those conversations, he's been able to learn quite a bit about what is art, how does one go about making it, why does one make it, what does it mean to make art that's meaningful, those really big ideas. So I hope you enjoy this conversation I've had with John and that you check out some of the different things that he's doing.
John, thanks so much for joining me for this conversation and for joining my class. I know that a lot of my students are fans of yours and have appreciated what you have done for bringing conversations with some really fantastic artists into our own homes and studios. So I think we're all appreciative for that.
Thanks very much. I'm very happy to be here.
Yep. Let's get started just with some really broad conversation about art in general. What does that word even mean to you?
Art?
Yeah.
Well, it can mean a lot of different things, actually, because, we can talk about it specifically in the making marks or making paintings or sculpture or that kind of thing. But I think in the broader context for myself, I think of my life as art. I think my main artwork is my life. And it's not like I'm super fastidious or anything like that, but I do think I've curated my life. I've curated out all the stuff I don't like. So in many ways, I think my life is my greatest artwork. But specifically to do with art, I think really art is about communication, like fundamentally when you get down to it. And it's funny, when I started the podcast, I used to ask people this question: what is art? And then I'd go on to say, well, why is it still around? Particularly painting. Why is painting still around? Like surely movies are a lot better than art, than paintings. But the answers I got weren't fantastic, and they didn't really hit the mark for me anyway. Because to me, it just seemed like a very natural progression from, we're back in the cave. We all went out on a hunt. And then I'm coming back and I'm telling somebody who wasn't on the hunt about the hunt. And they're like, I'm saying, oh, it was really big. And then I came up behind this bison or whatever. And before long, I'd be squatting down in the dirt, drawing the bison with my fingers and going, now I'm here and they're there. And I threw my sparrow, my spear, and it bounced off the rock this way, so it's just
Yeah.
like a communication aid. And then that, you can see how that would progress onto, it's a rainy day outside and I'm bored in the cave, and I'm like, I think I'll draw that thing I was doing on the ground. I think I'll do it on the wall here so that I can, you know,
Hmm.
retell my fantastic hunting story over and over. And then, I mean, I think they have figured this out as well, that they used to, the cave paintings, they used to have a torch for at night,
Hmm.
like a lighted torch, and they'd hold up the torch to the particular bit of the story they were telling. So they'd use the torch a little bit like
Wow.
like cinema, and they'd kind of
Yeah.
go through the story of the hunt. So I think, like art where it is now, it's just a really sophisticated um, version of the same thing. It's about
Yeah.
communication, and it's about the artist communicating what's going on inside them. I mean, it's like, like if you've ever been to a yoga class, or you sort of, it's a kind of a cliche where they, at the end of it, the teacher will go namaste, and like that what that actually means, what namaste means, if you don't already know, is the Buddha in me sees the Buddha in you, or the God in me sees the God in you. And it's very like that. I think it's like something in me, I'm going to communicate that, and maybe it'll resonate with something in you. And like the flip side of that, or another version of that, is Mark Rothko was being interviewed one time, and the interviewer kept kind of hassling him for, what do your paintings mean, and he was getting a bit irritated. And eventually he kind of spun around and said, right, you've got sadness in you, I've got sadness in me, and my works of art are places where the two sadnesses can meet, and then both of us need to feel less sad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I
Yeah.
think is brilliant. So I think that's another way of saying the same thing, which is like communication. It's, art is, I think, in essence, communication. Whether it's, you communicating with yourself, meaning you make the piece of work and you go, wow, I didn't know that was in me.
Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
maybe other people will see it as well. So yes, that's what I think art is, or it's in the ballpark of what art is.
So this is a little off script from some of the questions that I sent you, but some of the things you were just saying really resonate with me, and some of the conversations I've had with my students. And so I just want to throw this out there. Um, you know, in some of the classes that I've taught, I'll ask students to dig deep and to just sort of meditate on what it is that they are feeling. Who are they? What are the stories that are within them that they want to tell? And one of the things that I hear pretty regularly is, well, I just don't know that my life is very important. I don't know that I have any stories to tell. And I have a sort of a pat response. As I say pat response, that's a little too dismissive, but I have a response that I will often use to sort of make someone feel comfortable and to allow them space to draw out their own stories. With that as an issue, what would your response to that be? If
Well, there's
someone
loads of
said, go ahead.
yeah, well, there's loads of examples in art of people telling very personal stories. In fact, my sense of it, but then it's also been confirmed by many, many artists, is that there is universality in the personal. So the more personal your story is, ironically, the more it can speak to lots of people. Um, and why do you want to be an artist anyway if you feel like you don't have anything to say? Like, I think that that's probably not true. I have a feeling um there's a sort of there would be some sort of something blocking, or some kind of disconnect, because if you've got the drive to paint or to express yourself in some way, somewhere that what you want to express is important.
Yeah.
So I like I wouldn't be at all afraid of making very, very, very personal paintings that only you know about, and that only seem important to you. Because, as I say, there's loads of examples. I mean, look at Vincent van Gogh painting, a bowl of or a vase of sunflowers in his little room. You know, I mean, the room looks. I mean, he could be sitting there going, "Oh, this is just a bed sit. This is such a boring room. Why would I paint this?" But he didn't. He just went, "Oh,
Yeah.
well, it's the way I see it, you know, and I want to try and communicate the way I see this." And, you know, thankfully he did. Luckily he didn't say that. Luckily
Yeah.
he didn't
Yeah. I
say,
agree.
why would I bother? You know.
Thanks for answering that. Just as a sort
No,
of side note.
I'm great off script. I'm really
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
I'm curious, and I've sort of wondered this as I've listened to your podcast and then seen things that you post on Facebook as well and social media in general. Who are some artists that you have found that you consistently connect with and feel drawn to go back and look at over and over again?
I had to make a list.
Good. Thank you.
Well, I really like Anish Kapoor. Right from the first time I came across him, there's something. I don't like everything he does, but I've seen some of his stuff in person, and it's a few times actually. I used to live in Australia, and unbeknownst to me, I was looking at one of his pieces without knowing what it was. It was just like a black cone, big cone thing stuck on the wall. And when you get up close to it, you almost feel like you're being sucked into it. Wasn't that wide? It was about 2 meters wide in diameter. But yeah, very powerful. And then I went to see his. He had this exhibition in the Royal Institute of Art in London, and I happened to be in London at the time, and I went to see it. And yeah, amazing. You know, like he had this huge one. It's called Ritual of the Void, if you're looking for it. And it was like it's a very ornate building. It's an old building, very ornate. And what he'd done was he'd made like a freight train out of what looked like blood, and it went through one of the arches in the room. So it was on a track, and that's all it did. It just went from one room into the other. But you know, it's just something. Yeah, that was just one of them. Like in another room, he had a cannon that was firing blood pellet. It wasn't real blood, but it was red, and it was gooey. And when it hit the wall, it would splatter. You know, it was wild stuff. Yeah. So, and I've heard him being interviewed, and he's fascinating as well. So, I mean, he has made some duds as well, but you know, he's got some lovely mirror sky, something or other it's called, mirrored outdoor sculptures as well. Beautiful. So I like him. I like Ron Muick as well. And I've seen one of his as well. And again, in Australia, it's called Pregnant Woman. I don't know if you know him, but he started off in film and then he went into sculpture, and he makes these oversized, very lifelike. It's like photorealism for sculpture. That's probably a good way of thinking of it.
Oh, wow.
So he makes, he'd have this like just a child bending down on hunkers, except it's like, there's my dog. It's like 30 feet high.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really impressive.
You want me to wait till the dogs are finished, or
it's okay.
Keep going? It's okay. It'll stop shortly. And the one I saw in Brisbane was called Pregnant Woman. And it's just a picture of a pregnant woman, naked pregnant woman, with their hands over her head, looking exasperated and a bit, bit pregnant and a bit over it and a bit ready to give birth. Except she's 15 foot tall.
Wow.
And she's completely to scale. And she looks, it's so realistic because he, comes from a special effects background.
Yeah.
You almost think that she's going to move. It's wild. So I love his stuff as well. Yeah, he's brilliant. I like Caravaggio. I can sort of always have time for Caravaggio. Terrible person, great artist.
Yeah.
But they found a Caravaggio behind a wardrobe or something in Dublin. I don't know, probably be 20 years ago now. It's called The Taking of Christ. And that's in the National Art Gallery in Dublin. So I've seen that quite a few times,
Hmm.
and it doesn't get boring. It doesn't get old. It's a brilliant painting. If you like shiny armor, it's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
right up. It's right up there with Rembrandt's gold helmet, dude.
yep.
Yeah, it's really good. And yeah, Caravaggio paintings are just, yeah, as I say, terrible person, but a genius. So
Why do
I
you
really
think that
appreciate
you feel drawn to those?
to those three.
To Caravaggio.
Um,
I feel the same thing. He's in some of my like the top of my list, but and I'm always asking like, why do I like this? And I'm just curious to ask other people the same thing.
I like the drama. I like the humanism. I like the and when I say humanism, he captures it all, you know, the good stuff, the bad stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, everything it is to be kind of human. I like the dramatic lighting. I like the high contrast. Um, you know, there's something kind of, they've got a slightly graphic quality. I mean, I like Rembrandt a lot as well, whereas Rembrandt is a little bit softer around the
hmm
edges,
hmm
whereas Caravaggio is sharper or something. I think it's
yeah,
because of that harsh light, you know, the sort of single light source, you know.
yeah. Hmm.
So yeah, like Caravaggio. I like Christo as well. He's the guy who wraps things, or he used to. I think he's still alive. I know his wife died. You know, the guy who wraps buildings and bridges and all this sort of thing.
Yep.
You heard of him? Yeah. Yeah, I remember being in Paris many years ago, like back in the 80s, and didn't know anything about Christo or anything. And he happened to have wrapped a bridge there. And I happened to be on a boat cruise and going under this, like just coming along on the boat and just seeing this whole bridge wrapped in orange silk with ropes and whatnot. It's wild, you know, and it goes right, went right down
Yeah.
into the water. So that made a big impression on me, and I've sort of kept up with him since. And then Banksy, I'm a big fan of Banksy. And then I'll quickly go through the figurative people that I really like. Nicholas Uribe, Adrian Stein, Felicia Forte, Rebecca Levi, Mia Bergeron, Stephen Bowman, Rachel Mosley, Finton McGee, David Shavitz, and Ali Kavanagh. I could say more, but I don't want to be here all day.
Yep. 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 Those are, I'm familiar with most, if not all of those as well.
Yeah, they're all
Um,
brilliant.
so I'm really interested. Some of the early ones that you mentioned are what I would think of as conceptual artists.
Yeah,
And I'm, you know this as well. It feels like in the realist world, there's such strong tension and a divide between anything that's not realist oriented or representational, especially something like conceptual art. So I'm interested to know from you how you understand, so I'm shifting the language just a little bit, how you understand contemporary art. What does that mean for you?
well, for me, I mean, you can Google it and get a lovely description, but for me, it's like what's ever trendy, what's ever fashionable.
Yeah.
It really just comes, as far as I can make out, it really comes down to fashion. Like, you know, bell bottoms are in this year, aviator shades are in last year, they're not
Yeah.
in this year. It's very similar to that. It's but the amount of money is is significantly different. So all the artists who are up there, you know, Damien Hirst, Jeff Koons, all those kind of things, um, they're just trendy. They're just like,
Hmm.
yeah, they're cool. You know, so it's like, say, with clothing, fashion, it's season by season, and things go out of fashion very quickly.
Right.
Just takes longer with art. And at the moment, the artists that are in fashion are, you know, some of the ones I mentioned who are, and unfortunately, realistic figurative art is not really in fashion. There are realist or figurative or artists who are fashionable,
Yeah.
you know, like John Curran and Gahinda Wild and Amy Sherring and Will Cotton. You know, some of those are
Hmm.
kind of in that trendy um, um, world, but mostly, you know, it's not considered very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, One of the things that I've thought about and sort of played with is just the idea that anything that is being made currently is contemporary art. Um,
Yeah, yeah, that would fit in with the Google definition, which is it's the art of
yeah,
now.
yeah, yeah, um,
But I heard somebody talking about the art world. It's on YouTube. It's just dude giving a kind of here's how to be a successful artist financially, one of those kind of YouTube videos. And it
yeah.
was a lecture, and most of it wasn't great, but this bit was. He was saying that there is no art world. That what there is a series of art villages, and they,
Hmm.
are interconnected. You know this lecture thing I'm talking about? You might have
No, but
seen
that
it.
makes sense.
Yeah. So it's like there's the realist kind of camp, and then
Right.
there's the other contemporary kind of camp, and they're not joined at the moment.
Yeah,
There's a gap between those villages.
yeah. Um, do you see, or no, what's the next thing? I'm checking my notes. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm interested if you distinguish at all between, say, those villages. So I'm thinking of like all of the
Well,
names that we could give things.
yeah, well, I think it's smart to like it. In, I think if you want to make a career of being an artist, you have to sort of know the market, and you have to
Yeah.
face that, and um, face the way things are. I mean, you can face things the way they are without accepting it, but you have to,
Hmm.
meaning like that you can face it and still want to change it. That's fine. But I think to be oblivious to the state of things as it is, including like the secondary market, which and how the auction houses work, the corruption that there is in the art world in
Hmm.
terms of money laundering. I don't want to think about the money. I don't think about the business side of it. I don't want
Yeah.
to. That's understandable. I just want to paint. I just want to get on with painting,
Yeah.
and that's a recipe for getting ripped off
Yeah.
for sure. And I've
Yep.
heard horror stories from artists, who had that kind of attitude. And I know it's unpleasant, and it's a very unsavory world, and it's so far from art because it's business. But if you want to make it your livelihood, you kind of have to, and or at least find artists who have navigated it well and are doing well with it. I mean, it's
Hmm.
changed a lot, thankfully, and with things like Patreon and other ways of getting paid other than selling paintings and having shows and having to deal with gatekeepers, which would be like what
Yeah.
galleries were in the
Yeah.
past. It's changing, and that's brilliant. And social media has changed it a lot as well. But I think it's important to see it all and to at least know when someone uses a term like, oh, what you're doing is not contemporary, that you know what they're
Hmm.
talking about, that
Hmm.
you're like, of course it's contemporary, I'm doing it now, so it has to be contemporary. That's
Yeah.
like fighting the wind. It's like it's not going to change because you're upset with it. So at least if you know the terminology and where they're coming from, you'll be better equipped to navigate it.
One of the things that our studio does pretty consistently is host workshops where we try and bring in, a Stephen Assell or um, uh, Patty Watwood or just whoever, and do a 1 week workshop. And I found that, of course, I benefit from getting to learn from them. But one of the things that I found most helpful is being able to ask them questions about the business side, because they will have so much experience to share. Exactly, sort of engaging the things that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, I highly encourage you to get Ashley Longshore to come up, even to do it on Zoom. You know Ashley Longshore?
I think I remember listening to your interview with her. Was
Yeah.
she?
Well,
She was a little bit earlier in the podcast.
yeah, yeah, but she's just gone from strength to strength. She doesn't do
Yeah.
anything with galleries, sells everything through her Instagram account. And she's gone from being struggling financially for many years. And then
Mhm.
Instagram came along, and now she's a multimillionaire and has a team working with her. Um, so, I mean, she's a force of nature, but
Yeah.
she's great for thinking outside the box and outside the existing financial structures, because she was
Yeah.
rejected by so many galleries that she just got sick of them. And she's very she swears a lot.
That's great.
So yeah, she's great, but she basically went, right, okay, well, I'm just going to do it myself. And she
Mm.
was very strategic about what she divided up different markets. Like, she went after one market. She zoned in on hedge fund managers' wives, and she created a
Wow.
series for them called Trophy Wives, right? So
Yeah.
she was kind of ironically painting for this
Yeah.
group of women, um, and she would go to New York. She's based in New Orleans, but she'd go to New York and do things just totally for that market, And she was telling me that she had the great pleasure of seeing a Damien Hirst lifted off of the wall and one of her paintings put up in its place.
Wow.
And that's just one market she targeted.
Yeah.
She does collaborations with Bergdorf's in New York, and
Yeah.
she has very carefully cultivated her
Hmm.
collectors. So she's just, if you're interested in another perspective and a kind of from complete left field kind of perspective,
Yeah.
she probably wouldn't come for a week, but you might get her on a Zoom call.
Yeah.
She'd have great things to say,
Yeah. Thanks. Thinking some more about just the way that we divide up art with terms, and thinking about contemporary versus what comes out of ateliers like classical realism or whatnot. Do you find, is there a particular term that you find most useful for art that is coming out of ateliers or realist-based institutions?
I think it depends who you're talking to.
Yeah.
Like, if you're talking to somebody on the street who doesn't really, when you say you're an artist and they go, oh, they immediately think you're, a cross between Jackson Pollock and, performance artist, or,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I will say I'm a figurative artist, and then they'll go, what's that? And I'll say, well, it's recognizable stuff. It's trees, people, houses. And then their shoulders go down. They're like, oh, great. Okay. So, if I'm talking to another, somebody who knows art, then you could say figurative, you could say classical, you could say, well, I wouldn't consider myself a classical artist, but, you could say that, or academic. Or a phrase that really seems to connect with people is when you say, oh, I paint like the old masters, or I endeavor to, at least. Then they kind of get it, and they'll be more interested in it. But I mean, it's changing anyway. I mean, there's a whole, I don't, do you know John Seed's book, Disrupted Realism?
I think I've run into it. I know it. I haven't gotten to look at it.
Yeah, well, he basically put his finger on where figurative art is kind of going, or realistic art is kind of going, and it's where people have the skill to paint, classically or academically or very well, but they're doing something slightly different with it, So artists that would be in that would be like Alex Kanevsky, Zoe. Oh, I've forgotten her surname. Sorry, Zoe. I'm thinking of Zoe.
I know you're talking about, though.
Yeah,
I can see her paintings in my head.
Yeah, that's terrible. It's probably because she got married. I wonder, did she change her name? That kind of artist. Mia Bergeron is in there as well. It's like, it's recognizable. It's not going backwards into impressionism, but it's new. It's slightly different. And I'm not talking about drips, okay?
Right.
I'm not
right.
wild about drips, or oh, look, this isn't looking cool enough, I'll get a squeegee and kind of go over it a few times and make it look cool and trendy and modern. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about they're doing something different, so it's kind of changing. So he put that under the classification of disrupted realism. which is it's interesting. It's nice to sort of put them all together like that, because I've been kind of seeing them and going, oh yeah. And then, I mean, you've got the whole Ordinerdrum school, which, and they sort of call it the kitsch, which I'm not wild about that name, but that's another kind of style. And it seems like Ordinerdrum is so charismatic that everyone who goes to study with them ends up painting like them. It seems to be hard not to.
Yep.
There are people who don't, but
that's right.
It seems it's more common to end up painting like them.
I think of Nick Alm as an example of someone who studied with him and paints very differently, as well as maybe Teresa Oaxaca.
Yeah, Maria Kren is another one who seems to do her own kind of thing as well.
Definitely.
I was just talking to Michelle Dahl a couple of weeks ago, and she was saying it's very, what'd she call them? They're like his disciples.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's not trying to cultivate that, but I could see how you could be enamored by that, but that's understandable.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Did I answer your question? I think I went off track.
No, yeah, that's great. So one of the things that I think about a lot as a figurative artist who's also teaching others to work in some sort of figurative realist tradition is, and also thinking about how do we make art that actually matters? What does that mean? All of these sorts of things is when we are pulling from our guts, the stuff that's inside of us to come up with pieces that we want to make. I often wonder how much we should engage current events and politics and things like that. There's a lot, maybe you've seen this in the news, there's a lot happening right now in the US with, especially the last week or so with shootings by police officers. And like, that's an example of how much should we as artists engage things like that. You have a Max Ginsberg who's a social realist, all the way through, someone who's, I'm just gonna paint existential angst. So I'm curious as to what your thoughts are with that sort of big topic.
I think really primarily across the board, to do with everything, you have to be authentic. And being authentic means painting what is real for you.
Yeah.
So whereas you might think, oh, I'd love to paint a painting that really changed the world.
Right.
But that could really get in your way. That thought, and I don't think it happens like that. I think anyone who painted paintings that changed the world, if a painting ever changed the world, I'm sure it did, but I don't think they got up that morning and said, right, today's the day I'm going to paint the big one. They just got up and painted another painting, and it just happened to be amazing.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to just paint whatever you want to paint. Now, if that happens to be, no, I want to paint paintings about this stuff, and there's an authenticity to that, then great, that'll be fine. But it's very easy, particularly to look on Instagram and see what everyone else is doing and going, oh, I should be painting pictures of people with masks on because that's what's happening, man. Whereas maybe you just like flowers. Maybe you just really like flowers and you want to paint flowers. It's like, oh, what am I doing? Shouldn't I be doing something a bit more significant? And no, because if you have it in you to paint, big multi-figure paintings that are all about, your version of Guernica or whatever, then it'll work because it's coming out of you and it's authentic. But if you really just want to paint flowers and you think you should be painting big social paintings, they won't work because they'll just look like an idea, like a concept. Your heart has to be in it, like all the way from beginning to end. It won't sustain you otherwise, So I think it's great. I think the people who are moved to paint that kind of painting, they'll just do it and it'll be fantastic. And
Yeah.
then you can kind of tell when someone's being clever in the painting. I can anyway. It's like
Hmm.
it's all kind of heady kind of stuff and no heart, no juice. It's just like an
Yeah.
idea on canvas. It's like some clever idea somebody had. Oh, I'll do this and I'll put that thing there and oh, it'll be brilliant. I'm terrible for this. I do this all the time. I don't do it with paintings. I do it with other things. But I think I'm having the best idea I've ever had, and then I'll write it down or something, or I'll think about it, and then I'll look back at it afterwards, and it just has no heart. It just is a bit clever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say don't worry about it. If you have it in you to paint that kind of thing, then paint it. And if you don't, then just paint whatever you do want to paint. Because it's hard work. It's not like a snapshot. It's
It
going to
is.
take you a while to make the painting, and you
Absolutely.
won't get that time of your life back. So you may have to make it count.
Who are 2 or 3 artists that you can think of, and could be anywhere from conceptual art to academic figurative stuff, that you think hold to their vision of life and reality particularly well?
What do you mean now, life and reality?
So you were just describing you need to paint
Well, being authentic.
what comes from inside of you. Yeah. So can you think of 3 artists whose body of work or um, cumulative work you've seen over the years and you think, man, they are just telling us what life is like from their view?
Hmm. I had a friend, Martin Finnan is his name, Irish painter, Irish artist, and I knew him well back in the 80s, late 80s. And I remember calling to his house one evening, and he was a very cliched starving artist. Like, he was broke all the time. I helped him put on an exhibition. But I called to his house one day, and he was gluing Monster Munches to a chair. Now, Monster Munches are they were like a snack food, so it'd be like popcorn. They make these things out of starch and they make them into funny shapes for
Yep.
kids.
Yep.
So he was gluing these to a chair, right? So he's basically making a piece of sculpture out of breakfast cereal or whatever it was, junk food, and a chair, right?
Yeah.
And I just thought, wow, this guy is an artist, like through and through. Doesn't matter where he is, what's going on, he just has to make stuff and he has
Yeah.
to express himself. So that always stuck out to me.
Mm.
And he's still painting. He's an abstract artist. He's still painting, and he can draw really well. Like, he's one of those kind of abstract artists. He's not doing it because he can't draw well.
Yeah.
Excuse me, but yeah, he does abstract paintings, and they're very nice. So he's one. I think Bank. He seems to have a lot of integrity, and his
Hmm.
stuff really punches always. Anything I've
Yep.
seen of his just is very, very good. Um, Vincent Desiderio just comes to mind. He's very paints from his, the balls of his feet up. He
Yeah.
seems to paint with his
Yeah.
whole being. And very personal paintings. Like, some of them I don't understand, but you can feel that they're just
Hmm.
completely, that's what he wants to paint. I think I certainly haven't interviewed anybody who I got under the surface with them and it was a bit fake under there. Everyone seems to,
Yeah.
everyone that I've talked to anyway, they've gone through periods of being influenced by galleries and where they were like, oh, that was a great paint and that sold like in 10 minutes, give us 20 of them. And they've either said no or they've tried and watched their soul dissolving and eventually got back to, no, that doesn't make me happy at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, most of the people that I've talked to are very congruent with what they want to paint and what they end up painting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of you saying you've gotten to talk with a lot of artists and it's felt very authentic oftentimes. Uh, when we finish up, I'm gonna get you to do a little, uh, uh, as much as of a plug as you want for all the different ways that you're expressing yourself via podcast, your own artwork. I recently found, when I was getting in contact with you, your work with Emergence.
Further emergence, yeah.
Yeah. So through all of these sort of different venues, you've gotten to work with so many different people and have conversations with so many different people. What have you learned about art making that you could share with a group of people listening or taking this class?
Hang on, I wrote a few of them down. I've learned so much. It's so funny. Like
Yeah,
I never went to art school, but I feel like I have
right.
learned a lot from talking to these artists. And weirdly, they've changed the way I paint. And not because
Really?
not because afterwards I've shown them my paintings and they've gone, oh well, you could do this and you could do that. That's never
Yeah,
happened, right? If anything, they might sort of see them in the background and go, oh, that's very nice. That's as far as it goes.
yeah,
But yet when I go to paint, and also it's accelerated my learning. I don't know how,
yeah.
but it has, Um, so some of the things, or some of the standout things, are Bo Bartlett probably summed it up best when he was saying that paint has this magic ability to capture the intent or the space that the artist is in internally as they're painting. And he
Hmm.
was saying that he gets his students, they mix the paint, whatever, and they put it on the brush. And then before they go to apply the paint, he gets them to stop, check in with themselves, and to blow on the paintbrush, right?
Yeah,
To infuse this energy of whatever it is. So if you're, want to paint a painting about sorrow, then you have to sort of be in the sorrow headspace with it the whole time, from your heart, feeling the pain as you're painting, and then that in some way gets magically captured in the painting.
hmm,
And that was a big kind of light bulb for me,
yeah,
of going, it that it just has this ability to capture. It's like, I heard an interview with Gabriel Byrne, the actor, and he was saying the same about cameras. He was saying there's something magic about a camera, a movie camera,
mm,
in that it has the capacity to, even if you're not saying anything, it records what you're thinking. So as an actor, you have to be thinking about whatever the character is supposed to be thinking about, because if you're not, the camera's going to spot it. And it's like exactly the same just with painting. It's
yeah,
not like, and once I heard that, I stopped listening to music and podcasts when I painted.
yep, yep,
And I became much more conscious of where I was at internally. And it was not a case of like, oh, I've got to paint this hand now, I'm just gonna,
hmm,
I'll go somewhere else while I paint this hand. It's like, no, I'm very much staying with the feeling of why I bother to paint this painting in the first place. Staying with that in
hmm,
essence. Which is similar to Nicholas Uribe, what he was saying about staying with the, if you either see something internally, like you have a vision of, oh, I want to paint this painting about this thing I've seen inside. It's either, whether it's that, or you've seen a lovely picture and you've taken a photograph of it, or you're out in the lovely sunset and you're trying to paint that.
yeah,
It's like, as well as painting it, to continually examine, why do I want to paint this? What is it about this thing that I'm seeing that's, of all the other things, why have I zeroed in on
yeah.
this? What is it about it? And to continually examine that. So I found that very helpful as well.
Can I ask you to pause for a
Um,
second?
yep.
Just because that observation, it resonates really strongly with me and something I've thought a lot about as well. And I've sort of compared it to method acting.
Hmm.
Um, and I've, had friends, good friends who are either in theater or film and have different responses to method acting. And You know, some of them say like, oh, this is such a horrible thing to do to yourself because you have to be in this character for so long. Um, uh, and with painting, it feels a little bit different because I'm not taking myself to a place that's not me.
Yeah.
You know, have you thought any about a parallel between method acting and this idea of blowing the ruach on the brush?
What does that mean, blowing the ruach?
Oh, I think that's what Bo Bartlett said
Sounds
in that
rude.
interview. No, ruach is the like Hebrew word for breath of life or
Oh, right.
spirit.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, that went
Yeah,
over my head. Was that when he was talking to me?
I think so. Yeah,
Oh, okay. Wow. I
yeah,
missed that bit. Yeah. Um, well, I think it's similar to method acting, except you don't have to, as you say, you're not making up a character. It's just you, and you're just trying to stay with what it is. And also, you don't have to take it home with you. It's really just when you're in front of paint, when you're in front of the easel, and you're very conscious of the moment the paint goes on and where you're at when that happens. It's funny, like again, I was just talking to Michelle Dahl, and she paints these lovely intimate pictures of couples and love,
yeah,
and it's part of her process. She was, when she started painting them, she was very lonely, and she started painting them because she wanted to not feel so lonely. She started off painting where she was at, but all her paintings were really lonely looking, so she was like, okay, this isn't working, it's making me more lonely. I'm going to start painting paintings that I want to bring towards me. So she started painting all these couples and these beautiful, intimate pictures.
yeah,
But she was saying, I don't paint them in one go. And sometimes I'm not really, wouldn't have been really in that space. And maybe I'd be feeling a bit lonely, and I'd be looking at the painting going, why can't I have this? That kind of thing. And what she was saying was that when people would look at their paintings, she was saying the number of people who cry in front of her paintings is a lot. And they'd be going, I don't know why, it's a lovely picture, but I feel really sad. And her take on that was a version of what we're talking about, which is, she was saying they're probably picking up on that day's painting where I wasn't feeling particularly
yeah,
lovey coupley. I was feeling like lonely, and where is this? So her um pictures are very interesting like that, in that the longer you look at them, you can start to feel all these different feelings. And I think that's what we're talking about. It was like she was going through different moods on different days when she was painting
yeah.
them. So I don't know a huge amount of method acting. I don't know enough about it to really compare it. That thing with Gabriel Byrne just stuck in my head about the camera
Hmm.
can record what you're thinking. And it's similar when
Yeah,
you're painting. It's like the paintbrush records where you're at as you
yeah, I
paint.
agree.
Similar. Oh, yeah. On with my tips. Hang on a second.
Right.
And pretty much 90% of the artists I've talked to have imposter syndrome. So, and that seems to be very helpful for everyone to hear that. It's like, even really look at someone on Instagram, they've got a, flip ton of followers. And it's like, oh yeah, I was talking to them, they've got imposter syndrome. It's like, oh, they have it. Oh, okay. Well, then, then it's not
And
just
I'm
me,
okay.
because yeah, because like imposter syndrome lives on the idea that it's just you. You're the only one who's an imposter in the world. Everyone else has got their act together.
Yeah,
And when you hear that, like so many artists who are fantastic and successful, and maybe are somewhere that you would like to go, and then you hear them saying they've still got it, I think that's very helpful.
agreed.
Um, my personal take on imposter syndrome, I didn't plan on this, but it's funny, like from hearing all these artists talking about it, only popped out of my mouth not quite recently, a couple of months ago. I was like, somewhere I just realized that I had figured it out for myself. Was like, yeah, I'm okay with this idea, because how imposter syndrome works is a part of you on the inside is going, you're a fraud. You're not an artist. You're just a fake. And someday it's going to be discovered. And the pain comes when the other part of you that goes, no, I'm not, I'm an artist. And then this part goes, no, you're not, you're a fake. And so on. You just go back and forth. I never had that. Like when that started to come up with me, like you're an imposter, I was like, yep, I sure am. And I'm going to ride this train until someone figures it out. But until then, I'm just going with it. And I never had any conflict about it because I didn't get into a fight with it. I was like, yep.
Yeah.
So that works for me. I can certainly pass it on. A big thing I discovered was another big thing. This is not related to being an imposter. Was this idea? I think it was Katie O'Hagan who first kind of said it. Was that she had to face the fact that she didn't become the painter that she would have liked to become. Meaning, she liked Sargent and, big bravura kind of painting and loose. And it's funny, a lot of realist artists go, I'd like to be a bit more loose, but she doesn't paint like that. She paints very tight and very beautiful, paintings. And that was very liberating for me as well, because I liked lots of different artists. And I would kind of look at the paintings I was making going, yeah, I kind of would like to be a different kind of artist, or I'd like to be, a bit like that other person or a bit like that other person. Yet I would still keep painting the paintings I was painting, So I think it's, for her saying that, it was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then that allowed me to just kind of go, well, I can appreciate Sargent and it would be lovely to paint like that because it sort of feels there's a lot of air and space in his paintings. But that's not the way I paint. And to be okay with the two, that I can appreciate, one kind of art and a particular type of painter, but then I can also make peace with the painter that I am. And that sort of doing that certainly allowed me to go further because I didn't have that kind of conflict or break on myself. I was just like, no, okay, I'm just going to paint the way I paint and appreciate the way they paint. So that was a big thing. Another thing that sort of dawned on me slowly was, and I haven't heard anybody else talking about this, was that there seems to be two kinds of artists. There's artists who are expressing something, an inner vision that they've had, and the whole focus is to get it out of their head onto the canvas. That's one type. So I've kind of called those that kind of painting a process of expression.
Yeah.
And then there are other painters who start off with no idea. And this first started with Martin Campos. And the way he described how he painted was he'd line 5 blank canvases up around him. And he'll have his paint in the center and he'll just go really still into himself. And he kind of almost paints figuratively in an abstract way. He'll just go into himself and then he'll just wait for the moment and then he'll just attack all the canvases at the same time. Not like, Jackson Pollock, like he's painted paintings, but he's trying to not think about it and just get his mind out of the way and see what comes out of it. And there's something about that I found very appealing. There's another artist called Mel McCudden who does a similar kind of thing. Rather than when he puts his ground down, rather than just do burnt umber or something like that, he'll do a few different colors. And he's not doing anything consciously, but the combination of the different colors as grounds make a shape, make a something, and he'll just put that up on the wall. He'll watch it. He'll just look at it for hours and hours and hours until something starts to appear out of it for him, and then he'll paint that. And that kind of painting, Nicholas Uribe is a little bit similar in what I was saying about continually exploring. Like he's quite happy to distort things and make them not realistic because he's after this thing of, why am I so interested in this stairway? What is it about the stairway? And the stairway might end up looking borderline caricature of what it is that he's, the reference he's working from. So I kind of think of that kind of painting as more of an exploration. And I think it's probably a little bit more the way abstract artists work. But yeah, it seemed like the more artists I talked to, they were either one or the other. They're either
Yeah.
like I was just talking to Azansu, I'm sure I pronounced her name again, Martinez in Spain, and she's very clear vision in her head, and then the whole process of painting is getting the vision out of her head onto the
Yeah.
canvas. So yeah, I found that something that sort of took a couple of years to reveal itself, that there were, oh yeah, this person's a vision kind of person, that person's a exploration kind of person.
Yeah.
And the last thing then is really what we were talking about earlier about being in charge of your business. It seemed like most of the artists who'd experienced heartbreak, financially heartbreak, were happened because they were reluctant to really face the business side of it and get into it. And even if that meant facing themselves, that they had shortcomings in that area, and get help, that they trusted, or people to advocate on their behalf. But people, it seemed like artists who shied away from it really suffered and got taken advantage of.
Yeah.
Whereas, artists who just went after it, like Ashley Longshore, did well. So that thing of being on top of the business and understanding it, understand the way it's changing, because it's changing all the time. It's changing fast.
For sure. Yeah.
So those were the highlights.
Yeah, those are great. Thanks for sharing those with our class. I want to be respectful of our time together. We're getting right up to the end. Do you have any final thoughts on making art that matters?
Well, I'm happy to talk about that, but you did ask about something that I thought was a great question. I think it was your last question about what's the biggest opportunity for those with training in realist and representational.
Yeah.
And I think I was thinking of this anyway, but I think Aranzazu Martinez in Spain is a great example of this, right? I don't know if you've ever seen her paintings, but she trained with Jacob Collins, and can just paint out of her skin. Like, she's just amazing technical painter. She's in the Ibex collection, so she's in that borderline photorealistic thing. But she paints these inner visions that she's had. So she paints these amazing paintings that they're not really allegorical. They're just they're like, what is that? You just keep looking at them, but they're painted fantastically. So it seems like the shortcomings of both approaches to art can really complement each other, meaning like the shortcomings of conceptual art, and the story I've heard over and over and over again is, I wanted to be an artist. I went to art college. They didn't teach me a thing about drawing and painting, and then I had to go and learn that on my own.
Yep.
Right. So that's the shortcomings of that approach. And then the shortcomings of the atelier approach is, I can draw you an apple like you just want to eat it. I just don't know what to paint. I can paint fantastically. I just don't know what to paint. And that's why you see all these, I can't remember who called it. I think it might have been Kyle Staver. She said, I'm sick of looking at babes on sheets. And I know exactly what she meant,
Yep.
And so the academic rigor is fantastic, but if you have that, then you can apply because the one thing that kind of art school story that everybody overlooks is, like they just skipped over how to paint and draw. Yeah, but they spent all that time focusing on your thought, and they apply the rigor to, what are you trying to say? They apply all that rigor to that. And I think those two, there's an opportunity there to bring those two together and to paint, fantastic paintings that, regardless of what you say, like, there's something very accessible about figurative painting, or realistic painting, to a lot of people. So if you can combine good thought, good concept, and the sort of rigor that you're put through in the kind of art school, as it stands at the moment, kind of approach of, understanding your thought. That's why those kind of artists, they can write about what they're doing so brilliantly. You're looking at this pile of bricks on the floor, and then you're reading about it going, oh, okay, yeah, that looks brilliant. Now that I understand, I've read everything. I've read this, 5 pages about the idea behind it. It's so well written, so
Yeah.
to bring those two together, I think, where you can almost like defend your what, here's why I'm saying what I'm saying kind of thing. I think there's great opportunity there. What did you ask me about art that matters?
What do you think it means for a piece of art to matter, and how does the maker of the artwork go about trying to do something like that, which we've kind of talked about a little bit with authenticity?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that. I remember, I don't know who it was saying, like any kind of artistic creation, whether it's writing or whether it's painting or sculpture, whatever, it is a bit like giving birth. No, I don't mean to trivialize giving birth. I've never given birth, so what would I know about it? But the idea of creating something, right?
Yeah.
And that once it's born, that's it. Your job's over. It's up to the world after that. And you just have to let it go out into the world, and it either sinks or swims, but your job is done. You've created it. You've borned it. Just invented a new verb there.
I like it.
You've just, you've done your bit, and you can't know whether it's going to be a creation that matters in inverted commas or not. The main thing is that it matters to you, because like one of the painful things that I've had, and I'm sure it's the same for everybody, is well, not everybody, because anyway, I'll explain what I mean, is what Ira Glass talks about, the gap, between, like, I have a very good eye and my skill level is nowhere near my eye. There's a gap, and it means that I can look at my work and feel like I can know where I wanted to go with it, but it's not there. And I can feel the kind of pain of that, And I think that's a common kind of thing that people can feel. Okay, I've completely lost my train of thought. What did I start off to say?
Oh, we were just talking about authenticity and making things that matter.
Oh yeah, right. Sorry. Yeah. So with that pain of like, oh, this isn't near enough to where I want it to be. If I happen to make something that it's like all my, like when I look at paintings, if I look at a really good painting, it'll be like, it's like all the lights go on inside. If I look at my own painting and it's not as good as I wanted it to be, or it didn't get where I wanted it to be, or there's bits of it that annoy me, the lights don't come on, or some of them come on, or whatever. If I happen to make something where all my lights come on, that's a painting that matters. Then it's like, I'm happy. I don't care.
Yeah.
Like really, if other people like it, that's a bonus. But it's like, if I manage to get something that matches up with my taste or my style or my eye or whatever you want to call that thing, that discerning quality that knows the difference between something that's good or not good, purely subjectively. I'm not saying, for anyone else, but just for me, if I can do that, I mean, that's brilliant. That's a painting that matters, and if somebody else agrees, that's a bonus, So I think there's that. I mean, because, we talked about Caravaggio, we talked about Van Gogh. I mean, they didn't know they were making paintings that mattered. I don't think. I'd be surprised if they did. They were just, I mean, okay, hard to know with Caravaggio because it's so long ago, but certainly with Van Gogh, I mean, he's a bit like my friend sticking the Monster Munches to the chair. Like he just couldn't help himself. He just had to do it. And, poor man only sold one painting in his life, so like if he was on Instagram, he'd have no followers, he'd still be painting, even if he'd be the guy on Instagram who has 10 followers and 6,000 posts, he's just like keeps putting it out, So he didn't know he was making paintings that mattered, and that changed the
Yeah.
way we look at painting, So I think you can't know. I don't think you can know as an artist. You can just be authentic, be true to why it is you want to paint or be an artist in the first place. Just be true to that, and you know take care of business, make sure you know that it's sustaining, that you've got enough income to keep it going,
Hmm.
and that's all you can do, and the rest is it's kind of out of your hands, I think, anyway.
Yeah, I really appreciate sort of the recentering idea of um, something mattering, being it mattering to you as an individual, and making things that resonate with your own being. And if someone else resonates with it, then that's fine. But if not, that's fine as well. Um, 'Cause
Yeah,
I
because
think
if you
that
go about it the other way, it definitely won't work.
yeah,
And I've heard that from lots of artists. If you
yeah,
try and second guess the public and you try and go, oh, I think this
hmm,
will be cool, I've seen 15 other people doing this on Instagram, I'm going to do this as well, it never works. It
yeah,
never, like I've heard so many artists say that it just doesn't work to try and, or to kind of think, oh, this is a bit dark, maybe my audience won't like that. As soon as you
yeah,
start thinking about your audience, you're lost. It's
yeah,
like, if paint it and never show anybody, but still paint it. Like you can,
hmm,
like express it and then think about it afterwards. Like I've written a couple of books, I've written 4 books, and one or two of them have been very personal. And that thing of, there's a quote by I think it's Ernest Hemingway, and it's sort of said, "Oh, there's nothing to writing. You just sit down at the typewriter and bleed." And it's very true. Like, like I've written books and I've gone, oh, this is very personal. I don't want to say
hmm,
this. I don't want people to see this. And the number of times I've had to, uh, kind of make deals with myself with my fingers crossed behind my back, which is like, we'll just write it. We're not going to show anybody. We'll just write it. We'll just get it out. We'll write it. I'm not going to show anyone. Of course, it ends up in the book, but
yeah, yeah,
that kind of authenticity of being raw, being personal, really expressing the stuff you don't want to express, that makes
yeah,
the best art, I think.
yeah. That's a great place to maybe wrap things up, because I think that's
Okay.
a clarion call for art making.
Yes, it is.
John, thank you so much for your time. I think my students are going to really appreciate the things you have to say. As maybe an outro, where can people find all the various ways in which you are working these days?
Well, thank you for that. Everything pretty much goes through my website. So if you go to johndalton.me, .com wasn't available, but it is me, so it's .me. All right, johndalton.me. Yeah, everything is there. I do lots of different things, and this is kind of bookends what I was saying at the beginning, being my life is kind of my work of art. So I do the podcast, which we've talked about a lot, which is interviews, long form interviews with artists, most predominantly figurative artists. And then I write. So I've got books, and I'm also an artist myself. And then I also work with people to do with. I was a craniosacral therapist for a long time, and then that's kind of transitioned into working with people, mostly to do with growth, inner growth,
Mm-hmm.
growth in consciousness. You could call it spiritual growth. That's been my kind of main kind of passion through my whole life. And then I've done other things, and I don't see much of a difference between that and artistic expression, because it's the same,
Yeah,
because that's a combination of, I do not daily anymore. I do meditations on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook. That's to kind of just help, because meditation's a
yeah,
great thing to help with inner growth. And then I do retreats, and then I work with people one-to-one as well. And that's all part of the same, so my week is very, varied and beautiful and very interesting. But all of that you'll find links out of johndalton.me for all of that stuff.
That's fabulous. And I'm going to say thank you on behalf of my class to you, who I think probably know you mostly from your podcast. And I will continue to encourage them to listen and to find you on Patreon.
Oh yeah, Patreon. That's right.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I kind of think you have to listen to the podcast before you go to
Yeah.
Patreon.
Yeah.
But yeah, Patreon as well. But that's the link. There are links to all that as well. On
Yep.
the
Absolutely. Thanks so much, John.
You're very welcome. Thanks for asking me to come and chat.
All righty. Well, I look forward to listening to future podcasts and maybe chatting sometime in the future.
Yeah, that's no problem. Give us a shout. I like having Zoom tea with people.
That's right.
Yeah, and feedback is good as well. Like for you can suggesting painters. Obviously, that's fine. Don't always agree, but that's fine. I have to like the painter, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So people make suggestions, and I'm like,
No,
yeah.
That makes complete sense. I mean, if you're gonna spend your time and resources interviewing someone, it really helps if you're very interested in what they're doing, or at least what they're thinking about.
Yeah. Well, at the end, as you know, because you listen to them, at the end, I kind of go off on a little kind of rant about how brilliant I think they are, and I couldn't do that. I couldn't fake that.
Right.
So
right.
I have to genuinely. Plus, I spend quite a bit of time with their art in the run up to our chat as well. So if I don't like them, I'll just be grumbling away the whole time.
Yeah.
But also like not just artists, but things that are happening like with all the NFT stuff. So if there are things that you hear of or that you would like me to, because I have the catch up episodes as a way of I can highlight things, or if there are things that you're interested in or your students are interested in, I'm very open to all that, to include them, whether that's promoting something or say when the NFT thing was started to come up, people were going, what is this, what's it about? So I was happy to kind of talk about it as best I knew. I mean, it's an unfolding thing, but that kind of thing. Feel free.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you so much. And
you're very welcome.
We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
See ya.